Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Well, we're kind of diving down a really deep rabbit hole. Things are getting a little strange, and I'm starting to realize that I may be brushing some feathers that I shouldn't be, but I'm going to continue on until I'm told not to. I'm pretty excited. I've got an interview coming up tonight. I'm going to be interviewing a subscriber who lives out in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and had an encounter with the Beast of Bray Road. So I'll have that up tomorrow for you guys. But today I've got some more of these Dogman, Sasquatch, missing people, and government involvement. Before we get into the upload, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They're available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those audiobooks are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload. Around the Great Depression, my great-grandfather decided it'd be a good time to build a second home. Why, I have no idea, but he did, and he did it. He decided upon Vermont, as it's not too far of a ride from his house in Woodbridge, Connecticut. But it was far enough that he felt he was away. He found a plot at the end of Cowan Road in South Londonderry, right next to the Windhall River. Over the years, he built himself and our family a beautiful, oversized log cabin. Now, years later, I come along, and around the time I was 6, 1995, he passes away, leaving the home to my grandmother. We would go up and make our best effort once a winter at skiing. It always ended poorly. Clearly, we are not a skiing family, but the times we truly enjoyed that home was in the summer. It was always a little cooler in Vermont and absolutely beautiful. Far fewer people as well, and the proximity to the river was sublime. It was literally in our side yard. My aunt spent many years living there alone, but she always refused to tell us any stories out of fear that we would not return. Unfortunately, my little sister declared around the age of 14 she would never return, but refused to tell us why, because we wouldn't believe her. So that leaves us with my experiences. The house was always kept in perfect, spotless condition, and my aunt had furnished it in a very cool way, with lots of interesting antiques and cool old signs. It had the Vermont look, you could say. Nothing creepy about it whatsoever, but at the same time, you could always feel a presence about the house. It was clear to us the spirits of my great-grandparents were still around that house. The usual stuff, footsteps at night, doors opening and closing by themselves, the occasional apparition out of the corner of your eye. Being, as we were sure that this was just my great-grandparents, we felt no fear. In fact, it was almost comforting, knowing they were still around and perhaps even enjoying our company. Me, however, the scary stuff was always outside that house. We were maybe a half a mile, if not a little more, from the nearest house, and other than our yard and the river, we were surrounded by thick, dark woods. Many nights as I lie in bed, I would hear menacing growls in the woods behind the room I slept in. On a rare occasion, I'd get brave enough to peek out of the window and notice a pair of glowing eyes. I could only ever glance so briefly that I was never able to make out a body or size of the animal, but I'm sure it was there. In the mornings, I would always go back and check, but there was never a sign of anything. No footprints or crushed plants, nothing. As I grew older and was allowed more freedom to explore, I would spend my days riding my bike along the dirt road, sometimes going beyond our dead end down the old access trail to the Winhall Brook campground to see if there were any other kids my age to hang out with and perhaps explore the woods even more. I'll never forget riding down the trail on a beautiful summer day and noticing it getting colder and darker. But still, my naive self continued on. I began hearing footsteps in the woods above me, every so often a branch snap, a crack echoing through the valley. Every time I stopped, the woods grew silent again. I picked up my pace, continuing toward the campground, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me, and telling myself that it's just an animal or something silly in the woods, and supernatural, cryptid, whatever things don't exist, so stop worrying. Sure enough, the second I calmed back down, I saw the eyes in the woods again, and again I saw no silhouette, shape, figure, nothing, just darkness and eyes. I pedaled harder and faster than I ever had in my life, and made it to the campground quicker than anyone who has come before or after me. And I sat in that campground for hours, scared of what might happen on my ride home. But nothing happened on that ride. The path was bright, the air was warm, and the birds were chirping. Needless to say, it took a few years for me to ride that trail again, and I was no fool, and made sure not to be alone when I did. Now the river was always interesting. It clearly had a soul. It was more than just water, meandering through the rocks. It had character. Over the years, it had worn perfectly smooth channels in the rocks, creating beautiful, natural, and immaculate water slides. There were perfect little pools one could sit and read books for hours on the slides as well. It was like our own little amusement park. Now on to the weird stuff. That's why you're still here, right? It seemed like every morning there would be these towers of river rocks built on stones throughout the river. Now these stones were identical to the ones you'd see along our road as we drive from the house. Always round river rocks, tapering down in size with the largest at the bottom. They probably ranged in the size from a foot to 2 feet high, and I always just assumed it was locals doing Vermont stuff. Not a wild assumption, as Vermont people do some weird things, but the river ones were strange because it requires swimming and a lot more effort to make. And even if you'd knock them down at sunset, they'd be back up at sunrise. We're not destructive people, so it's not like it was a thing to knock them down every day. But sometimes they'd fall while we were just playing, and sometimes we'd use the rocks as skipping stones, as they were perfect for it. But the towers would always come back. One hot and humid July day, I walked down by myself to the edge of the river. Now, we had a rule that you weren't allowed to swim alone, as sometimes the currents could get strong. And if you really wanted to swim bad enough, it was always easy to get someone to accompany you. I was sitting at the river's edge, splashing my feet in the water and collecting stones to skip when I began to hear rustling on the other side of the river. I looked and looked, but could see nothing. Eventually, I had forgotten the rustling and began skipping stones again. Unfortunately, the rustling started back up, followed by sticks cracking. Yet again, curiosity got the best of me, and I began following the noise down the river. I came across the foundation of an old logging bridge. Nothing new or special, just 3 large stone piers, one on either side of the river and one in the center. It was here that I stopped following the noises, as we'd always used the bridge as kind of the end of our zone. But as I did, I noticed movement by the pier on the far side of the river, and large stones began rolling through the trees down toward the river. Again, it began to get chilly and quiet. Nothing like the previous time on the trail. A location I was not far from, but like a cold wind, and as if the woods had a dimmer switch and someone had slowly dimmed it. I stood silent for a few minutes until I was sure whatever it was gone before trying to silently walk back toward the house. And again, as I did, it warmed up. The birds began chirping again, and by the time I was back, it was as if nothing ever happened. As I grew older, I often wondered if perhaps the spirits of my great-grandparents had stuck behind to protect us from whatever was in those woods, if there was anything in those woods. Let me take you back to that house in Vermont. As I said previously, it was always a little spooky there, and despite being geographically alone, you never quite felt alone. Writing my previous encounter brought up some memories, so I figured I'd share them with my sister and see if she'd finally say why she refused to go back. Lo and behold, she was glad to share. My sister was always a bit of a bookworm. We had a nice screened-in porch at the front of the house with a beautiful view of the front yard, the river, and the woods, where she would often sit and read. She was always mature for her age when it came to dealing with everything other than her brother, and as a result was allowed to fly solo from about the age of 5, much to my dismay of my mother, but that's a story for another time. As a result, when I would go for a bike ride with whomever the supervising adult was or down to the river, she would sometimes stay back at the porch or in the house to read and sometimes explore. On one occasion, she noticed odd writings on the window screens. The only one she can remember is a message saying, "All who wander are welcome." Later that evening, when the adults were doing some lame adult thing, my sister confided in me about the message and how much it freaked her out. I'm sure I responded in some immature fashion, but needless to say, she was right. Soon I began finding these writings all over and even became a little freaked out myself, all written differently, but all conveying the same message. My sister soon confronted my aunt about these, but she refused to give us an answer. Upon bringing this up to our parents, they asked her the same questions with the same results. Over the years, our relationship has deteriorated with our aunt, so I fear we may never get to know the true meanings of the writings. Sometime later, I went to the house with only my aunt. I was older now, 17 or 18, young enough to be stupid and old enough to know how. I had brought some pot up in hopes of smoking some in nature and exploring, but my plans were soon cut short when my aunt mentioned she had to deliver some pot to an older friend of hers with terminal cancer. It was at this point I declared mine was better and we should gift it to him instead of hers. Thankfully, this went over surprisingly well, and hopefully it helped make this man's remaining days a little better. My aunt was also kind enough to give me hers to replace what I had given away. If you're facing the house, to the right of it is a very large, thickly wooded hill. Perhaps you could call it a small mountain, but for now we'll refer to it as a hill. I began to gear up for this exploratory expedition. I'd been planning and almost made it when my aunt noticed me putting my shoes on. Upon telling her where I was going, she decided to join, much to my dismay. So off we went, with me leading the way. It wasn't an easy hike, as the underbrush was very thick, and there were pricker bushes all about, but we were making good time. My aunt mentioned how she almost never went up this way, and certainly hadn't been here in years, but that's where we were going, and nothing was going to stop us. The higher we went, the stranger things got. The cold thing began happening again. The woods seemed unusually dark, but this time I wasn't alone, and if she wasn't saying anything, surely things were fine. We began to notice things that were strange going on with sticks, not Blair Witch-style effigy or anything that downright horrifying, but sticks sticking out of the ground unnaturally, or laid in oddly perfect rows. She even commented on them a few times, but she didn't seem worried, so neither was I. We kept climbing, coming across these strange sticks ever so often, but eventually we thought nothing of them, and soon we could see a clearing that looked like the top. As we emerged into the clearing on the top of the hill, we noticed that there was what seemed to be a very large bird nest in the center, maybe 5 to 6 feet in diameter, created from the same sticks we kept seeing on the way up. Surrounding it was a series of logs in a circle. None of them were cut down, as they were all broken and split at the ends, as if they had been collected from the woods around. We poked around some more, but there was nothing else interesting. The way down was more of the same. We did come upon a dead deer, but it showed no signs of anything weird. It was just dead. Honestly, I probably only remember it because it was gross. Talking about what we found later did no good either, as my aunt didn't seem to think anything was strange or unusual about what we saw. But I sure did, and I'll never forget it. Really quick, I usually wait till the end, but to me, what that sounds like is definitely portals and whatever, some sort of strange cryptid, either Bigfoot or Sasquatch or Dogman. Definitely something very strange was going on, but I really think there was a portal. Vermont is a very strange and creepy place. If you've not been there, it is beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's like the land time forgot. But like this person said, it is very creepy. Today's second part of the upload. This happened to me in Germany. Back in the day, the soldiers who were stationed here would go out to a train in the woods. We would often go there almost every day, checking the shooting range for bullets, shells, etc., whatever we could find. Since I'm half American, I would talk to many of the soldiers, and we'd often trade beer and chocolate for some MREs. In the forest, there used to live a woman. We called it a wild hex here. I guess it'd translate to forest witch in English. The woman lived in the woods for 25 years. The last thing I heard about this woman, she got arrested by the police and was locked up in a mental asylum. We would often talk to this lady, and she would talk about random stuff that made absolutely no sense. She often talked about a witch Tellmanner. I have no clue what the English translation would be. Maybe some kind of dwarf/imp. I'm not sure about it. She even showed us the clothing she sewed crafted for them, and said it was some kind of tribute, so that she can live peacefully in the forest. Judging by the size of the clothing, they had to be like a foot tall. Anyways, on this particular day, me and two of my buddies decided to ride our bikes deeper into the woods just to explore and maybe find a new shooting range. In the distance, we saw a person sitting on a log beside the trail. My bud was like, "That has to be the witch." Turned out, he was right. As we got closer to her, she stood up and blocked our path. She was really angry and asked us what we were doing here. We told her that we just wanted to explore the woods some more. This is about the time I was a little creeped out. She started to talk about weird stuff about the Krabbenmenschen, some kind of crab humanoid. At one point, we'd had enough of her crazy stories, and we kind of laughed it off. I said to her, "Well, maybe we will meet one of your friends along the way." We hopped back on our bikes, and just as I was going to pedal off, she suddenly grabbed my arm. It was really tight grip she had on me, with kind of a creepy smile. She said, "I warned you." I told her to fuck off and let me go. We kept advancing deeper into the woods and joking about the things she said. We maybe did about, I'd say, 2 more kilometers until the trail was so bad it became impossible to ride a bike. We'd taken a break and decided that we should turn around. All 3 of us were just sitting on an old log, and suddenly I got goosebumps, and even my eyes got a bit watery. I looked over to Daniel and noticed he had goosebumps as well. Mark, my other friend, who was with us, said, "You guys feel that too? We're being watched." Daniel's the type of guy who always goofs around and stuff, And I would have bet all my money in that moment that he would have said something like, "The crab people are stalking us," just to break the tension. But he didn't. Instead, he said with a serious tone, "We should get the hell out of here and now." We were riding out of the woods at a really fast pace, and it felt like forever to get out of there. We have really never talked about it, not even after all of these years. I have goosebumps writing part of this. I was really scared that day. The silence was what freaked me out. You didn't hear a bird, a branch falling off a tree, nothing. Just this dead silence. Who knows what's out there? I thought this story was fitting. Today's third part of the upload. I guess I'd describe myself as a skeptic with an open mind. I don't really follow any topics such as portals, Bigfoot, UFOs. However, I had a paranormal experience many years ago, hence an open mind comment. I discovered some things in the show which caught my attention and reminded me of some things I hadn't thought about in years. A little background about myself. I'm 58, originally from the South, ex-military. I've lived in SoCal since '85. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, hunting and fishing, both in Georgia and California. I used to be an avid backpacker and fly fisherman, and have taken many trips into the Sierras, usually solo. I like the solitude, and the idea of being totally reliant on no one but myself. But due to new interests and hobbies, I haven't been out there in about 5 years. The parts of the Hunted movie that caught my attention the most were the boulders, granite phenomenon, and the woman in the tree stand who said the woods got quiet. Now, there had been a few instances where bird noises in the woods suddenly stopped. Most times I feel nothing abnormal, but a couple of times were weird. It happened on a hunt once for almost a minute, and I got an uneasy feeling, like a presence was there. I didn't see or hear anything, and I felt embarrassed afterward. My hunting partner was probably 75 yards away, and he didn't notice anything at all. I've had several experiences near large rock formations that I never even thought about again until after watching the movie. I've backpacked the areas of the eastern Sierras, from the John Muir Wilderness up through Mount Whitney and east of Yosemite. Particular rock formations get my attention because I'm aware of mountain lions when I travel, but several times I felt drawn to these rock formations for no reason, almost like a force is pulling me to them. There's a particular stretch of the trail along the Upper Kern River that's like that. The first time I hiked it, I was moving pretty fast because I wanted to find a camping spot and fish before dark. I was excited to be fishing up there for the first time. For some reason, all of a sudden I noticed I had slowed to a leisurely walk and felt drowsy. I sort of lost track of time or how far I had hiked. It was like I was in a daydream. I sat down on a fallen tree and had some water, thinking I was getting dehydrated, even though I had been sipping from my camel pack, and it was a cool November afternoon. I was hardly sweating. I checked my topo map and calculated the time I had been on this trail, and it pretty much lined up. I started looking around, and up on the ridge above me were 3 large boulders. They looked like they had been placed there by giants. They were so neatly arranged, I got an urge to climb up and check them out. I actually had to talk myself out of going up there, which was crazy because I was in a rush to make camp. I couldn't stop looking at them. I started up the trail but kept looking back at those rocks. I felt like they were looking at me. I felt the hair on my neck and arms stand up. I picked up the pace and got up onto the trail. Even though I passed by, hiked around, and climbed over many boulders around the river the next few days, nothing else happened on that trip. On the hike back out, I met up with a couple of hunters on horseback. One had a nice buck draped across the rear of his horse. I followed behind them a ways, but they were soon out of sight. I started looking up for the rock formation, but I must have already passed it. I've been back there several times, and sometimes I get the same feeling that the rocks were pulling me in, and sometimes I feel nothing. I've never climbed up there to get a closer look. I've had a few other instances of being drawn to rock formations in the Sierras, but I assumed it was because of memory of that one experience. I've heard things while in my tent in the evening. Sometimes my mind tricks me into thinking I hear words spoken as the water runs over boulders in the river, like full-on conversations. I woke up once from a dream about bees to the sound of a deep, low hum above my tent. It sounded mechanical or musical, like from a synthesizer. I didn't have a rain fly on, so I could see through the mesh up into the moonlit sky and trees. I didn't see anything. It lasted 10 seconds. Heard a mountain lion once. It sounded just like a baby crying. I swore I heard a bear outside of my tent sniffing and grunting. It knocked my small stove and cup off the rock I used to cook on. After it left, I unzipped the tent and shined the light on the area, and there was nothing disturbed. At the first light, I looked all around, and there were no tracks or anything. The mind does play tricks. The weirdest noises I heard were up near Cottonwood Lakes, below Mount Whitney. It's just at the upper edge of the tree line, so there are a lot of bare rock, like a moonscape. Was last there during the full moon. It was surreal. I didn't see another person until I was packing up to hike 4 days later. I heard a loud whoop sound one night. It seemed really far off, and I assumed it was a hiker yelling for his buddy. It was 3 or 4 whoops. It didn't really sound anything like Sierra Sound segment of the haunted movie. That would have freaked me out. Twice I heard a large rock crashing down into the boulder field on the side of the mountain. One night I heard what sounded like a very large bird fly over. The wings sounded enormous. I assumed it was an owl. While fishing at one of the 5 lakes up there, one day I heard a buzzing sound like a bunch of flies. It sounded like it was coming from behind the large boulder by the lake. I figured there was a dead fish or a small animal back there. I worked my way over and walked behind the boulder. There was nothing there, no flies, nothing. The buzzing stopped just as I approached the spot where I assumed to find a dead animal with flies all over it. It was absolutely still and quiet, not a sound except my own breathing. It was like my ears were plugged. In fact, I bought some Boys noise-canceling headphones recently, and it was the same sensation. This lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds. I had a sinus congestion and headache pretty much the entire day, so I figured that had something to do with it. Anyway, those are some of my experiences for what it's worth. I hadn't really thought about this stuff until I watched the movie the other night. You know, a while ago I was talking about Skinwalker Ranch, and I was talking about Sasquatch and Dogman, and I had kind of just a theory popped into my head about all the crazy stuff that people have claimed to have seen at Skinwalker Ranch, like that hunter that was sitting up on a ridge and he saw a portal open up about 3 feet off the ground. And he could see inside of it. It was just pitch black, but then the next thing you know, this monster, this hideous abomination of a monster just plopped out and just gone into the woods. And I was thinking about that, and then all of a sudden popped into my head, maybe the Dogman and the Bigfoot, or the Sasquatch. I hate calling it Bigfoot for some reason. Maybe they're here to protect us, or the earth, from these things. It was a weird theory one day that I popped into my head, and I was like, well, maybe, huh? But anyway, I really think that there are portals all over, especially in the Sierras, the Adirondacks, Vermont, everywhere. You know, I think there are many portals that people just don't want to acknowledge the creepy, weird shit that happens around them. And, that explains it. Some interdimensional or extra-dimensional BS is going on, and We need to figure it out. I know for a fact that the government knows about it. They probably don't know how to deal with it. They're probably more afraid than we are because they actually can, physically lay eyes on it. Where we talk about these, intense, crazy experiences. But just imagine sitting up on a ridge, just relaxing. You're hunting elk or whatever. And all of a sudden a portal about 30, 40 feet away from you opens up and this freaking hideous creature just plops out and runs up the hill. Crazy. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I want to thank everybody for all of your support. It truly is appreciated. With that, I'm going to bid y'all farewell and see ya!